Hi, I'm Delisi.
And I'm Chef James Rigato, and this is Essential Cooking.
In episode 4, we talk with fishmonger Matthew Wiseman from Motor City Seafood.
This New Zealand native landed in Detroit and raised the quality of seafood available in the Motor City starting in 2017. His worldwide connections and years of experience made for a fascinating conversation about the amazing fish we rarely eat and the honest truth about the fish we tend to eat a lot of.
What's changed since you started doing this? What has the evolution been like, or maybe not evolution, over the last few years when it comes to fish, the access to it, and that whole world?
A supply issue, especially at the moment, is very, very difficult. Freight issues are a problem. Airlines are a problem. But what's really happened over the last 3 years is that we're finding that different fisheries are being closed down. For example, the sardine fishery off the west coast was closed last year. Certain species are becoming unsustainable. There's quite a few that we don't touch on anymore. I think you're going to find a lot more is going to be going into good farming practices. So we do quite a bit of farmed. The wild fisheries that we work with, the thing about us, I'll go back a little bit, is that we're all about sustainability. All the fish that we get, apart from our salmon out of Alaska, are all line caught, and it's called ikejima, where they're bled out, if you like. We use for salmon out of sockeye, kings, things like that. They're gill netting out of the Copper River or Yakutat or something like that. I think where the industry is heading is going to be more farm fish. The good thing is that the practice is becoming a lot better than what they used to do even 5, 10, 15, especially that long ago. But it's a difficult game because it's all in logistics. Fresh fish is you really want to get it in house within 48 hours. Otherwise it starts. Every 12 hours on fish makes a difference. Keeping on tabs of that is pretty mind-boggling. I think at the end of the day is we've managed to keep good relationships. It's a very trusting industry. You got to trust people. We call it the 3 I's, if you like. We've got to trust our suppliers to look at the fish before we get it, and then we quality control it when it comes in, and then we quality control it when it goes out. So if you can, and you have to develop relationships with your suppliers with that. The future of fish, as I said, I think it's going to be more and more farmed. We work with countries and with sustainability, and there's unscrupulous people out there. So a lot of it's tracking and making sure you're getting sustainable fish and things like that.
What's interesting about farm fish is that it's a very mundane term for an incredibly vast system, because not all farmed fish are created equal. Like you got tilapia, which is kind of like considered to be, the fish like that I don't touch, right? Most tilapias, you don't even sell tilapia, do you? Maybe you do.
No, I've bought it in a couple of special times or in Quest, but practices have changed quite a wee bit. They used to farm tilapia underneath striped bass, hybrid striped bass, and of course you can imagine what's in the water there. But they have come a long way. James is right, but at the end of the day, if you want to get your fish to market, you got to and command a good price for it. You got to have good growing practices.
Yeah, but look at the modern day tilapia. So my point is tilapia for a long time was considered very frowned upon fish. It's a rather dirty fish, right? Yes, it's totally gotten better. I think because of transparency. But then you look at Atlantic farm raised salmon, where it's like the pellets are dyed and they're in these they're just these steroid muscle fish in these small pens, and then that's why you can have a commodity price in every Costco and Meijer and every store in the world. And you get, because I see it a lot with home cooks or with people with cooking classes or people that, the only fish they'll eat is salmon. And then I have to have a conversation where it's like, well, that's actually, I think that's one of the worst things you can be eating. It's pretty much it's a pellet fed, dyed, muscle fish.
Farm salmon is an interesting point. It is a commodity. So it goes up and down with supply, just like any commodity. But that's why we work with the individual farms. Lochdu out of Scotland. They use capelin for their food, which is for their feed. Caplin's a small fish that you get tobacco from. So there's no human consumption. It's sustainable. It's as close as possible. So you're going to pay a little bit more of a premium price. But then you're dealing with a farm that's not using any drugs, any antibiotics, using good feed for it, for the fish. They have fallow areas every year, so they don't pollute the environment that they're in. And yet, on the other end of the scale, you have the mass production, where you have antibiotics in the feed. You've got colorants in the feed to make the flesh look orange.
It'll be the fish would be gray if it wasn't for this dye.
They use chicken byproducts, I'm not going to say where because people will be able to understand where from, but the chicken byproducts, which already have enough drugs in them, and they use that as feed for the fish, and it's really not a natural feed for them. So that's why you have to add colorants to them and things like that.
But that's so like, I mean, just to slow it, because you got such a lovely accent, you go so fast sometimes. They're feeding the fish hormones and antibiotics,
Sure.
and then they're feeding them mass-produced chicken scrap,
Yep.
which is already full of hormones and antibiotics.
Correct.
This isn't organic chicken that they're feeding them. It's obviously from the large producers in the States.
Not so much in the States because there aren't really any large producers in the States. It's places where we just don't buy salmon from. It's just purely because of those reasons.
Right. So, and that's the salmon you're finding that's available internationally. Mostly on the Western Hemisphere. But like chain, if you go to the certain chain restaurants that have them on their menu, $12 blackened salmon salad.
Yeah.
That's not.
Well, you know why it's blackened.
yeah, exactly. That's
right. It's mass produced. It's a commodity. A lot of the chains these days aren't run by chefs. They used to be when they first started. It's more to do with accountants looking at the bottom line.
But what's the brilliant marketing move that I see is like the salmon physically looks good in a package, right? In a styrofoam package with plastic on top. It's bright orange. It's pretty low scent. It looks to the eye of the average home cook. Oh, that looks good. That looks nice. That's a nice looking piece of fish. That's the sad part, the genius. Salmon, the wild stuff, what people don't understand is it's a very short season.
Right.
So wild is another word that I think gets used wrongfully often because wild is wild. You can't say wild if it's not a wild fish.
Well, that's very true. If it's farmed, it's farmed, and if it's wild, it's wild.
But they also people use it as an adjective though, like it's wild salmon. Like you see that. Like prime is another one in the beef industry. People will say this is prime,
right?
Because prime rib is a term, but USDA prime is a category. It's a classification.
Right.
Fish has so many lies and like mysterious. Not you, but on the
Look, there's
menus and
unscrupulous
consumer
people in any industry, and there is.
Well, okay. What's white tuna?
I think. Yeah, there is.
Is there a white tuna, Matt?
There is no such thing. But there's ivory salmon though.
Yeah, there you go.
Which is great. So, there's unscrupulous people. The season for wild runs from April through to November. Goes through the season where you start with the kings, the sockeyes, and then cohos, and that's how it runs. But there is a I think for a lot of people, the wild salmon, which is to me a lot better fish, and it's all natural, as natural as can be without any pollutants being in the ocean these days. But a lot of people aren't accustomed to the flavor of it because it actually has a really rich flavor to it, its own distinctive flavor. You can tell the difference between a king, a coho, and a sockeye. Whereas farmed Atlantic, it's basically you can pick one from the other one if it's commodity based, and if it's a private grown farm, it actually has its own different flavor and texture. So salmon across the board are the different species, wild, you'll know it, but a lot of people aren't accustomed to it. So there is a lot of demand, but the majority of the demand is a cheaper product that people are accustomed to, where it's pretty blasé tasting and it just looks really good on the plate.
Okay, so how does a person who cooks at home,
good luck,
wants to get high quality fish or salmon, whatever? I mean, after hearing all this, it seems like
it's
an
intense.
Exercise in futility. Like, where are you going to go to get it?
It,
And how do you know what you're getting? I mean, what kind of regulation is there really on the fish that we go to buy?
Labeling is an issue. There's a lot of false labeling. There's a lot of false names for fish. I don't know how you can come across a West Coast Dover sole, for example, when Dover sole only comes from this Dover Strait over in England, right? The English,
Dover.
the English Channel, should I say? But look, I mean, you've really got to. It all comes down to a trust issue, and it always comes back to a trust issue with fish. Ourselves, we supply plum markets, and they're very good. They have a very good selection of fish. We're about to start getting into e-commerce, and we're about to do public selling to the public. So we're just setting that up as well, and we'd like to think that people would support us because we'd be able to supply them with some really, really good quality fish that's fresh, that's different varieties as well. I think a lot of the chefs in town, a lot of the restaurants, they are very, very good. There's some really good chefs out there who you can trust. James is one of them. Andy's another one. Doug's another one. Thomas Lentz. All these people out there Eric at Joe Muir, they're seafood fanatics. Well, they're food fanatics, so they want to make sure that they get the best for their customers. So in some ways, you can trust a supermarket chain, which is Plum Markets, then you can trust the chefs that are putting on the paper on the plates in some of these restaurants, that you can trust them as well. But it's pretty difficult to get very high quality fish to the public without being a specialized supermarket or a high-end retail like Plum Market or something. So that's what we're looking to do, is bring that opportunity to the public here.
I think though
It's called public service is what that is.
Yeah,
I love it.
The missing link for me though is that the average home cook needs to go to the market without a certain fish in mind, for one. Because the Plum Market does a great job, but if you go there thinking, I want wild salmon today, you might be disappointed. And then you also need to have the actual cooking skills to back up what kind of fish you're purchasing. Because if you go to the market thinking like, I want to get a snapper, and you see fresh, wild caught sardines, you better shift gears and make sardines for dinner, because that's a hard find, and they're so delicious. And if they're fresh and smell great, they're good to go, because sardines have a short shelf life.
That being said, and we're talking about people cooking for themselves more this year than ever before. Okay, fish is an easy thing to screw up.
Oh yeah.
If you had to, and we're talking about you as a chef, people are like, okay, I see this fish and I want to go cook it. What are some of the basic things that people can do to make sure that they spend this money to get a high quality piece of fish, which they're going to get from Matt? What are the things that you would say, okay, do this, don't do this?
Well, if I could just say something before James, I think the reason people find it difficult to cook is because they're unfamiliar with it. Fish actually in itself is really easy to cook. I mean, you just saute one side, it sort of cooks through, halfway. Of course, you're supposed to cook fish through thoroughly by law, just in case there's any parasites in there. And then you just turn it off on the other side. So a lot of, when we supply Plum Markets, for example, we send them as thin as fillets as possible so people can cook without getting confused. So, and if it's a thicker piece of fish, say a Chilean sea bass or something like that, I mean, it's just like a steak. You'd pan-sear one side, pan-sear the other side, stick it inside the oven for 10 minutes, pull it out, and it's good to go. And that's really how simple fish is. Different applications you can do. You can use, whole fish. You can do skin on. You can do fillet skin off. That's a bit of an art form, filleting is. So, I mean, if you go to the supermarkets and where they do have whole fish, you can also get fillets. But it's really, really not that difficult. Just a little bit of seasoning, sauteing either side. If it's a little bit thicker, stick it in the oven. And if not, I mean, really, a 1-inch fillet of fish, you'd only really need to cook, 3-4 minutes on either side, and it's good to go.
I think what most people are unfamiliar with too is how edible and delicious fish skin is. Like a lot of fish skin. Okay, mackerel not so much, but like snapper, striped bass, bronzino, salmon, all those skins are incredibly delicious to cook. And usually, if you cook it skin side down and till it crisps up and renders like bacon, and then flip it over, put it in the oven for a second, and you're good to go. Unless it's a thinner fish like bronzino, you can just cook it all in the pan. But I also recommend, there's a book, The Whole Fish Cookbook by Josh Nyland, who came out of Australia, right? Is he?
Correct.
Yeah, he's not a New Zealand guy.
No.
I know you want to claim him.
He wants to be a Kiwi. We said, hey, mate, just get a few more accolades and then you can join the crew.
But Josh Nyland he's a young chef out of Australia, and he wrote the book. Like this is rarely, maybe once every 10 years does somebody write a cookbook that every chef in the world buys, and this is one of them. He really does a great job. He also dry ages fish, which is like a whole different podcast. But that's a great book on how to properly fillet, how to properly cook, butcher, whether you want to do a salmon steak or, it's a really basic and great cookbook for the home cooks. The Whole Fish Cookbook by Josh Nyland is what I recommend if you're getting serious about cooking fish. But like everything Matt just said is very valuable if you're just like want to make fish once in a while. I also think in the sauteing is where some, believe it or not, most home cooks get scared of that. Sauteing, and it's like, I think some of these fish you can literally put on a sheet tray, a little bit of olive oil, salt, pepper, some fresh herbs, and bake it. Pull it out, squeeze a lemon, and that's all you need. Get some nice olive oil, get some nice citrus, and the proper amount of salt. If you give me a nice piece of fish, I'll eat that method every time. Just simple bake, salt, pepper, lemon, a little fresh herbs.
Yeah, same here.
Every time.
Yeah, exactly.
So less is best. and don't overcook it.
Especially if you're
for
new.
sure.
And you should be in good shape.
Yeah, less is more, I think it's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. No, that's exactly right.
Especially if
Should
you're
be
new
good.
to cooking that fish. Once you get familiar with it, then go to town and get crazy. But like if you're trying out a new fish, because it's not cheap, taking home a $25 fillet, take it easy, try to bake it, and start simple.
Yeah.
So, Matt, during COVID, the whole world has changed, and I'm sure your industry changed as well. And James and I talked a little bit about is Mother Nature having a chance to sort of refortify in certain ways, or is that not happening? Are there certain fish that were overfished that are not now? This year, particularly 2020, what's been the changes that you've seen, if any?
I think there's going to be some
Black perspectives haven't always been centered in the telling of America's story. Now, we're taking center stage. Introducing NPR's Black Stories, Black Truths, a collection of Black-led stories from NPR's podcasts. Search NPR Black Stories, Black Truths wherever you get your podcasts.
species that will, because of the lockdown and COVID, that are going to come back a little bit more, rejuvenate a little bit more. The East Coast, demand is down. Talking to all our suppliers, the prices are down. So in a lot of ways, it doesn't make sense for the fishermen to go out. I mean, striped bass at the moment, they weren't even fishing this week for striped bass because the prices were so low. They were 30% of what the prices were this time last year. So for the fishermen, it's not really worth to go out. So does that mean that in certain areas that you're going to have a comeback of those certain species? You probably will because the demand's down.
So Matt, let me ask you. I want to ask you, what fish won't you eat?
I don't eat tilapia.
Oh yeah. See, okay. Is that it?
I won't eat. I won't eat a lot of farm salmon.
Yeah.
Just because I know what they eat.
Yeah, but what about Loch Duart? What about the nice farms you're in?
I'll eat Loch Duart.
Yeah.
I'll eat West of Ross. The Faroe Islands
Yeah.
that comes out of there.
Right.
They're good practices. Certain countries I just won't because I know what their practices are. I don't like bottom-dwelling fish in farm fish, so there would be tilapia is one of them, although some of those practices have changed. But there isn't really much fish that I won't eat. Some have more parasites than others, so you've got to be a little bit more cautious.
That's one thing that I feel like every chef knows, and we just try to not talk about because people, as customers, don't totally understand.
Yeah.
But you got to look at it like, a beetle on a head of lettuce. It's really what it is. So like cod is very famous for parasites, right?
Right.
So and a parasite is it's basically a little clear or white worm, very thin, very small, and you can cook them and eat them. They're benign. They're not going to harm you. And every chef I know picks every worm out as they receive it.
Right.
But there's a lot of people, home cooks, if they catch one from the grocery store, they take it back to the grocery store and they freak out and they yell and they cause a scene. Take a picture, put it on Twitter, lose their minds. Fish this is just a natural part of the ocean world, is that if you catch a fish, it's going to have some kind of parasite. That's not bad, wrong, evil, tainted. Too many consumers that are freaked out when they see a blemish.
That's true. I mean, and as you said, there is one particular worm that can cause problems, but it's very rare. And but I mean, you could just cook them through. As James was saying, there's no. All it is that you'll see it, but then it'll get cooked through. Just so people know as well, you should be cooking your fish through anyway, just in case, because of parasites. The farms generally inoculate their fish when they're young. So sometimes when you see a darker spot around the chest cavity of salmon, that means that it's like a child when they've been, inoculated or had their shots for polio or something like that, So that eradicates any farm salmon. A lot of farm fish don't have parasites. So it's in a different species. It's in a different circumstances. Wild fish, you've always got to prepare for parasites, but they can be cooked through, and they're not harmful to you. Some species more so than others, as James was just saying. But I don't want to turn people off from eating different fish just because I think, that might have a heavier.
No, what I'm trying to do
parasite.
is normalize it, though. As a chef, I cook the world of the ocean, everything that I can that's sustainable. But too many people are, I think, they want to see things, sterile, bleachy, clean, and that's just not the case. Even in the oyster, I love oysters. I eat and serve tons of them. But you pop open an oyster, you find that little tiny crab in there.
Oh, I love it.
That's me too.
Yeah,
and
it's an extra.
Yeah,
you can eat those. You can eat those raw
You can.
too. Yeah, they're crunchy.
No, you can't. You absolutely can eat those little. But people look at that as something's wrong. This is a parasite.
That's true.
And sure, but technically that thing went in there and isn't supposed to be in there, or the oyster was eating it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that the oyster is bad or that oysters are bad. You know, this is just a natural part of the ecosystem of the ocean.
It's very true, and I think that started back when you're looking at produce. You know, years and years ago, we used to go picking for strawberries and make strawberry jam with my mother. And of course, they weren't perfect. There were blemishes on them. It was the same with every fruit. Nowadays, there's so many pesticides and anti-parasite drugs and things like that. They try and make everything perfect. So it's like anything in life. Aesthetic. It has to be aesthetic.
Yeah.
In the old days, produce used to have, little wormholes in the apples. There'd be little bruises. They wouldn't be perfectly symmetrical or round. It'd be sort of dimpled here and there, but they've eradicated those problems. And I think people have become so accustomed to seeing everything aesthetically beautiful that when they see a blemish like that, when they see, something to do with meat as well, with any product, they automatically think, oh, there might be something wrong with that. And I think that's just been a progression of evolution of the way that humans have been thinking from like the 40s, 50s up until where it is now.
Yeah, there's a difference between something that's flawed and something that's part of its ecosystem.
Oh, for sure.
And so it's important to realize that if you catch a fish, like right now in the Great Lakes, let's use that as an example.
Right.
Lake trout has lamprey scars almost every time.
Right.
Even when you just go catch one, hook and line hanging out with friends, you pull in a trout, you're going to see a lamprey scar, and that's like a little circular wound.
Right.
And but that fish is perfectly fine. And if anything, it's a reflection of like we need to take care of our waters because lampreys shouldn't be in there.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that the fish is tainted. So
No,
I think
not
it's
at all.
important to like know the difference between like what is dangerous and what is just part of an ecosystem.
Right. And these are all important parts too, because it is an ecosystem. It's like anything. Evolution has provided, these parasites and these fish and hosts and whatever to live in harmony, so they can survive. And that's basically what it is. So it's just part of the food chain.
So if you find a small little worm in your monkfish that you buy from the grocery store, don't take it back. It's not flawed.
No, there's no need to take it back.
Like you should just get tweezers and
get some tweezers,
yeah.
pull it out, or
Yeah.
just cook through it. It'll
Yeah.
be fine. You won't you won't come to harm. You know what I mean? It's not that bad. It might not look that good, but
that's the reality of the fish world, though. I think that people it's not a bleachy clean. Have you been in the ocean? It's pretty wild. Good. Like it's a gnarly, entity on planet Earth. You shouldn't expect things to come out there looking bleachy clean. What's overfish that people should avoid? What do you think of the top, do not eat? Because, restaurants are going to serve whatever they want. But, what do you recommend consumers stay away from for sustainability?
from sustainability,
Yeah.
bluefin tuna. Spanish mackerel off the East Coast, we don't do that. Stone crabs, we don't do anymore. We found out that it's really affecting the dolphin population, for
Stone
example,
crab.
down there.
So
Stone crab.
obviously
We're not doing that anymore.
you're
We're not-
aware stone crab is there's restaurant concepts that
I know
built
it's
around this.
I know it's ridiculous. It's not sustainable. It's
What's
just
happening
not.
to dolphins?
Well, they eat them, so basically it's affecting them. But also, what I just found out just recently, they used to only take one claw. I just found out recently that they're now taking 2 claws.
Oh, because the one claw grows back. That's
Yeah.
the whole idea.
So, yeah, exactly. So how are you going to eat if you've got one of your hands? If you've got both your arms?
It's
missing,
legal
let
to
alone
take
one of
both
them?
claws now?
Yeah, it has been for a little bit of a period. That's just what I heard recently. That's what's been happening. So they've been dying out, and all of a sudden on Monterey Bay this year it went from a yellow or green last year or the year before into this high vision red, like ding 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 ding, stay away. So you can have 12, 15 different countries that are all fishing in one pot, so they can't control the sustainability of it. So there's quite a few species out of the Gulf and out of the Caribbean that we just won't touch because it's just overfished.
Yeah.
Because there's no controls. Off the coast of Africa, when you have these big trawling ships and things like that are basically just destroying the environment and the fisheries there. What they're doing is that they're catching fish in nets. They're keeping what they want, right? The specific species that they want, and then they just throw the rest back in the sea, whether they're dead or maimed or whatever. So you're just getting anywhere up to 80, 90% of waste. And that's what happens. Whereas if you look at a New Zealand with a managed quota system, you're only allowed a certain amount of catch. And if you're going for New Zealand snapper, for example, you're allowed 1,000 ton. If you only catch 600 ton and the other 400 is bycatch, you have to count that 400 ton bycatch towards New Zealand snapper quota for that particular boat. So you have no wasted fish. And if tough luck, if you happen to hit a school of bluenose or Alfonsino or Kinmadai, another name for it, then that's just the way it is. You know, I mean, that's your catch. There's nothing thrown back in the sea.
But New Zealand obviously has a community and a culture around fish that they have a market for those bycatch. Whereas here, you know, if you had that same rule and regulation, you know, and people are trying to, you know, make all of a sudden, you know, Applebee's serve sardines, I think you'd have a problem, you know?
Yeah, you would. But I think, you know, a lot of that bycatch is really good fish.
Oh, I totally
there's
agree.
just nothing wrong with it. I understand what you mean.
We need to kind of change. We need to change internally as a people and as a consumer before we expect, you know, the government to regulate quotas and fishing boats.
Right.
What you can do as a consumer shopping in a grocery store really matters. I think that's a long-winded point.
Oh, it does.
Is that like us as a consumer, like putting down the Atlantic farm-raised cheap commodity fish and looking for something more sustainable and maybe less of it is how somebody can help at home right now today.
Right, and that's true. And I think, you know, traceability comes into that as well. I mean, if you can trace everything back to the source and know that it's good product, which generally the majority are, it might be a little bit different, but you know, you can trust through that process and you can expand what you're going to be buying at the supermarket and try something new. You know, that's part of the business as well.
Yeah.
You know, with wild catch, I don't know how many times I've had to phone people up and say, hey, look, they just didn't catch that fish this week. Well, I've got it on the menu. And it's like, well, you know, I sort of suggested to you not to put it on the menu because this is a wild catch, you know. So you have those issues. And it should be like in the supermarket as well. When people go out and buy fish, they should ask where it's from. Have you got any suggestions? Is there something? I'm always buying salmon. Is there something else I can try? You know, I'm always buying Chilean sea bass. You know, I'm always doing this. What about something else that's exciting? You know, once again, you trust those people; they'll give you a good idea of what to do, and just try something new. You know, I mean, that's part of the education of it as well.
I think too. One note to make is like oysters, mussels, clams. These are much more sustainable fishing practices than, like, let's say, you know, raising whole salmon.
Right.
You know, oyster farms can produce an incredible amount of oysters, and it's pretty affordable to operate. It's pretty. I mean, oysters. The more oysters in the ocean, the better off we are. I mean, they're literally the filters of the water. I mean, you and I know, Matt and I were out in Island Creek last year, and I took a full tour and had an incredible time. And that's really what the oyster farmers that I've talked to actually say that they argue that oysters are vegan, which is kind of funny because they say they're trees. They literally have, you know, growth rings like trunks of trees, and they filter out the water. They say they act more like a tree than they do like a fish. So they try to, you know, jokingly argue that it's vegan. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to go down that path. But, you know, eating and supporting more oyster farms and mussels and clams do similar jobs. That's a way to introduce more seafood into your diet, help the environment, and lower the cost. I mean, mussels, you know, $3 a pound. I mean, $4 a pound. Some of these grocery stores, like, is, you know, that's super sustainable versus trying to chase down wild fish.
Right, and that's very true. And the smart cookies now, what they're doing is they're growing on strings underneath some of these farms, oysters, filter feeders. Yeah, you know, oysters and mussels to actually eat all the excess food that's coming from the fish that they're growing above them. There's some places doing that at the moment up in Canada and some other areas of the world and things like that. Yeah. So it's like it's biologically good. You know, it's basically the full circle of what it was. Although, you know, you're going to have more.
Well, man's got his hands in it, so it's different. But
yeah, it's different, but it's still ecologically good because you can therefore you can grow in a certain area your farm fish on top. And then all the extra food, even, dare I say it, but the filter feeders, they eat anything. So there's going to be
waste.
So they're going to eat all the waste. They're going to filter out. So it's really good for the ecosystem. You don't get all that pollution that's coming from the fish. That's getting filtered out by the filter fish.
Well, they say, what is it? An oyster can filter, is it a 50 gallons a day? What's the number? It's like a crazy number, isn't it?
Sorry, what
a single oyster, how much water they can filter a day?
Oh, crikey. I know what it is, but I can't remember off the top of my head. It's an enormous amount. Enormous amount.
And you mentioned...
Oh, I tell you something interesting, though. When oysters are a big we're a big staple here. That's why down in Virginia, Chesapeake, that's where the first settlers sort of congregated when they first came here, because the only food that they could eat
were
oysters. Now, there's something interesting about that. I was reading about the oysters and how it sustained the population there. They're just eating oysters. There were so many oysters in there that it filtered out the Chesapeake Bay something twice a day. Something like, it was some ridiculous number.
It completely filtered the entire water body. Every day it was like a brand new
system of filtered water coming in and out. Yeah, it was incredible to think. And that place was littered with them. I mean, they were everywhere.
And those
So
are
that
probably-
would have been, at one
That's
stage, would
incredible.
have been extremely, extremely clean because it would have just kept on getting filtered by the oysters.
Okay, one final question, and this is actually for both of you. A fish that people might not know about that you think they should know about that's incredible.
Mediterranean sea bream.
Yeah.
Known as orata in Italian or dorade by French. Gilt-head bream is the Anglo-Saxon term for it. It's wild out of the farm. We got ours farmed, but it's from the Mediterranean. That's where it's wild from. And it's a beautiful fish. It's the most underrated fish of them all.
And you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that was my answer. So the sea bream is
Good, you got to find out another one then.
Yeah, I know. I will say so. The farm raised for sure. The sea bream, I think, is because it's also a crudo fish too. You can eat it raw.
You can.
and it's a fantastic.
Although by law you got to cook it or freeze it
Yeah, we
first,
know,
just so
Matt.
people know.
But the skin is really one of the best parts of that fish. Because I mean, we cook it on the flat top at the restaurant, and I mean, it's better than crispy chicken skin. It's the best.
It's
It's some of the best fish skin out there. But I will say the Alfonsina, the large golden-eyed snapper out of New Zealand, is some of the best fish I've ever worked with. And it's hard to get, but if you ever see the large golden-eyed snapper, aka the Alfonsina, that to me is the finest fish out there.
Okay, Matt, and we have 3 fun questions for you.
Far away.
Okay.
Love them.
What is always in your refrigerator? One thing you always have to have in your refrigerator.
2% milk.
It is not what I was expecting, I gotta say.
For my coffee.
Okay.
Did you want something else?
good.
That's perfect. Okay, if you had to eat at a fast food restaurant, which one would it be?
Can I tell you, don't eat at fast food restaurants?
We know you
That's
don't.
why
Okay.
the question's good.
If you had to, let's say you're in
Wendy's.
the middle. Wendy's.
Oh no. Okay, Wendy's because they have fresh burgers.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to be honest with you as well. The filet of fish that McDonald's do is that they actually, the factory when they catch them, they actually portion them on the boat and freeze them right away. There's no additives, no artificial flavors, no nothing. That's actually done on the boat. So the filet of fish is actually for McDonald's. I won't eat any other McDonald's, but the filet of fish is actually quite good.
Hey, that's good to know.
How about
Look at
that? And who's your favorite musician? Favorite band?
Favorite
Artist?
Bad Brains.
Bad Brains, perfect.
Wow.